Join us in Japan. This intoxicating island nation is blooming with beauty. Feel the energy and the aesthetics. Come with us to discover an eternal culture and modern marvels, an artistic aura and exquisite landscape, a serene peacefulness and bustling vibrancy. Taste, sights, and sounds evoke a distant past and an effervescent future blended into one exotic culture. An appreciation of nature and beauty is central to the country's traditions, manners, and way of life. We'll experience it all, not only the famous bullet train, the Great Buddha, the Sapporo Snow Festival, the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and the many shrines, gardens, and temples, but also the surprises that wait around every corner. Did you know Japan is home to a thriving gin and sake scene and more Michelin-starred restaurants than you can count? In Kyoto, the well-preserved imperial capital, you can pass young geishas in the street on the way to visit the famous Ranji Temple. And here is the magnificent Golden Pavilion and the majestic Nijo Castle. Aside from the sights, this leafy city has been rejuvenated with artists, photographers, specialty craft shops, chic concept stores, and pop-up boutiques. Tokyo pulses with neon glitz, its dynamism throbbing through the throngs all the way to the iconic snow-clad Mount Fuji that slices the sky in white brilliance. Peace and tranquility are found at the city's renowned Shinto shrine, and this peacefulness will stay with you long after you return home from Japan. Our custom trips are drawn from a menu of enticing experiences with something interesting for everyone. This is Michael Gelber, CEO iWorld of Travel, inviting you to experience another Memories Beyond destination. iWorld of Travel. Expect more, do more. Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are checking in from. We appreciate you joining our leadership webinar focusing on the Jewish heritage of Japan, specifically Gifu. We are in for another treat today with our guest presenters from the JNTO, as well as Jacob Shachon, who is just a great friend and just really, as I like to describe him, as a legend in the industry. So you'll be very pleased to have him share with you what to look for in Japan. Today's panel is a terrific panel that is combined, first of all, Zahava Patel, which many of you know is our Vice President of Global Sales, has been with us for almost 30 years, and a very dear friend of the family, and very dear friend to many of you travel advisors. And she's handled tours and faith-based travel tours across the globe. And it's just a privilege to call her a friend and really a family member. And she, as any of you have worked with her, you feel the same way. Alita Poljavec, again, has become a dear friend in a very short amount of time, but it seems like we've known each other forever. Coming to us from Atlas Compass, her focus was outbound to the Balkan region, really Croatia and all the Balkan regions and all of Europe. And it's just providing us with a real great opportunity in creating this new product, our luxury small group departures. We won't be talking about that today, but Alita will be handling the Q&A as well as any questions about any travel around the globe. We have Sivan Amit, who is with us from JNTO, the Japan National Tourism Organization. She'll be talking just briefly about what's going on with Japan and some of the various things to view and consider when you're going to Japan, just in a generic overview. And then, of course, our guest speaker is Jacob Shachon, who not only is a historian, a guide who has taken guided tours to 65 countries, has traveled, I think, to over 100 countries himself, speaks 15 languages, and he was a very dear friend of my father, and one that worked very closely with him. And I say my father, our family, as well as a company, and we just are very grateful and appreciative that Jacob has decided to join us today and share with us his insights and wisdom as it relates to Japan, and specifically in Gifu with the Jewish heritage. First up, the JNTO wanted, the executive director was kind enough to put together just a brief message. I'm going to play that, and then we'll get on with the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Keita Kadowaki, Japan National Tourism Organization, Los Angeles office. Today, we have invited Gifu Prefecture representatives here as guests. Gifu Prefecture is birthplace of Chune Sugihara, a diplomat who issues visas to Jewish refugees at the Consulate of Japan in Lithuania during World War II, saving several thousand lives as a result. This year marks the 120th anniversary of the birth of Chune Sugihara and the 80th anniversary of the issuance of visas. So Gifu and the Chune's birthplace have been putting in the special effort toward promoting what we like to call humanitarian remembrance tourism. Now they will be sharing about the beauty of Gifu Prefecture and the Chune Sugihara Memorial Hall located there.
All right, without any further ado, Saban, welcome, and it's all yours.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to iWorld of Travel and everybody here this morning, at least in my time, for joining us. I'm very excited to be sharing some Japan 101 information with you. And as Michael introduced me, my name is Siobhan Amos. I'm the marketing coordinator for JNTO's Los Angeles office. Next slide, please. Now, before I get into some Japan 101, I wanted to give you some brief updates regarding the COVID-19 situation in Japan. Right now, border enforcement measures are still in place until further notice, and this does include an entry ban on foreign nationals arriving from 150 plus different countries. Unfortunately, this does include the US. If you are granted special entry, though, you do have to undergo PCR testing as well as a 2-week mandatory self-quarantine. However, do keep in mind that transit through airports in Japan is still allowed as long as conditions are followed. For general updates, please visit JNTO's COVID-19 advisory page at japan.travel/en/coronavirus. This is updated near daily by headquarters, so it should be very accurate. And if you have specific questions, we recommend you contact your local Consulate General of Japan, as they are more of an authority regarding these measures. Next slide. Now, here are some example guidelines and practices against COVID-19 that have been proposed and or already adopted across Japan. Now, as you can see, it's split up by industries or even all industries, but across the board, everybody is really trying their best to limit the spread of COVID-19 so they could, again, invite and welcome tourists from all over. Next slide. Now, getting to Japan is usually very easy, as there are direct flights from 19 major airports across the US and including Hawaii. Next slide. And Japan itself is an international gateway, so you have several international airports to choose from. The top 3 most common, including Narita International Airport, which I'm sure many of you have heard of before. This is relatively close to Tokyo. If you want to get even closer to central Tokyo, though, you could choose to fly into Haneda International Airport. Or if you want to start your trips closer to Osaka or Kyoto, you could also choose to fly into Kansai International Airport. Next slide. And once you're in country, getting around is very easy. You could always choose to hire or rent a car, or you could do as many locals do and take the public transit. For this intercity transit, of course, you have the local trains and buses. And a great way to utilize this system is to purchase an IC card. The 2 pictured here are the Suica and Pasmo, which are the cards for Tokyo. Each region kind of has their own distinct pass with their cute characters, but it's a prepaid tap card. So if you're familiar with LA's tap card, London's Oyster card system, that's kind of the same thing. Just be sure you have some money on it and tap in and out of the turnstile so you don't have to worry about calculating fares, especially if you're dealing with connecting trains and buses. And a added benefit is you could actually use these as payments at participating convenience stores and vending machines. So you don't have to worry about shuffling through the Japanese currency if you just want a quick snack on the go. And another great option is taking the bullet train or the Shinkansen. And as an international passport holder, you could purchase the JR Pass. And this gives you a 7, 14, or 21-day duration of basically unlimited rides on any JR mode of transit. So this includes most bullet trains, local trains and buses that are owned by JR, and even some unique transits, including a ferry. Next slide. And as mentioned, the bullet train is very convenient. As you can see, it does span the majority of the country, making it very easy to go from A to B. And on top of that, it's very punctual. As written on the slide, the bullet train experiences delays of only 54 seconds on average annually. So what this means, though, is if you're late to your platform by even a minute, you may have missed your train, but don't worry because you could just hop right on the next one with that JR pass. And traveling by rail doesn't mean you can't travel in style. Of course, the ordinary car is very comfortable in its own right, but the green car is available on all bullet trains, and this is kind of a business class, a little bit more spacious. But on two of the lines, the Tohoku line, which goes up north, and the Hokuriku, which goes to the west towards Ishikawa Prefecture, including Gifu Prefecture, you could actually upgrade to Grand Class. And this is very similar to a first class. You get butler service, complimentary food and wine, and this menu changes seasonally, eye mask, slippers, basically the full nine. So it's a really luxurious way to travel. Next slide. Now, once you're in country, you may be worried about communication in terms of Wi-Fi and phone calls. Many people do first consider the travel sim, and some things to consider here are, is your phone unlocked? Because otherwise the travel sim won't work. And do you really need to make phone calls? Nowadays, there are so many apps most of us are familiar with, including Zoom, that allow us to make phone calls or even face calls to other people over Wi-Fi. And a great way to be able to use these apps is to rent a pocket Wi-Fi. Now, these are offered at major airports, including the three that I did mention earlier. You could rent them. The price will change depending on the speed and the amount of data you want to purchase. It's very flexible, and it could usually support up to 10 devices. So if you're traveling in a group, or if you personally own multiple devices, this is a very good way to access Wi-Fi, especially in those remote areas of Japan, just so you have some sort of connection to the rest of the world. Next slide. Now, Japan is considered to be one of the safest countries in the world. I'm sure it's in the top 10, if not the top 5, last I checked. But as you can see in the picture here, there are things called koban across Japan, and these are basically police stations or police boxes. But because the crime rates are so low, they usually end up acting as info stands or lost and found. And of course, items could be lost, or you could be lost yourself. I've personally ask for directions, but they'll give you very detailed instructions on how to get to your final destination. But you don't have to go to a police officer for directions. I've personally gone into more than plenty convenience stores, asked people on the street, and they've been very helpful and usually happy to help wherever I happen to find myself. Next slide. Now, in Japan, you do have quite a few accommodation types. You do have the traditional Western style hotels. In Japan, though, you are bound to want to stay in a ryokan or a Japanese style traditional inn. Of course, this does include the tatami mat with the futon on the floor, but this is a very unique experience full of Japanese culture, tradition, and hospitality. You could choose to do a hybrid of the Western and the ryokan, where you get the ryokan style building and inn, but then you also could sleep on a bed instead of sleeping on the floor if you have some back issues or if you just don't want to sleep on the floor. And many of these do also often have the onsen at the ryokan, so that's a great way to kind of tie those two together. You could always stay at a Minshuku, which is a Japanese style B&B, or you could do a shukubo, which is a temple lodging. And here you'd spend the night at a temple. You get to eat some vegetarian meals prepared by the Buddhist monks. And you could even choose to sign up for meditation or sutra copying classes. Next slide. And here's a list of recently opened and upcoming hotels. Of course, this list is not exhaustive, and this does still include 2019, and there's many more opening in 2021. But just keep an eye out because, like I mentioned, there are so many hotels opening on a regular basis. Next slide. Now, the currency in Japan is the Japanese yen. Exchange rates obviously do fluctuate on a daily basis, but personally, I tend to do 100 yen per dollar just for easy math, and that's a US dollar. Pre-travels, you could visit your local US bank. They usually do have Japanese yen or can access it. So give them a call 24 to 48 hours in advance just so you could go and make sure they have some yen on hand. Once you're in Japan, visit an exchange desk at the airport, or if you're short on change within Japan, there are Japan ATMs located at 7-Eleven convenience stores or post offices, one of which you'll be able to find very easily. They're across Japan. And usually we say keep about $300 worth of Japanese yen on you, just because it is still very much a cash-based society, and not all mom and pop shops or rural areas will be able to accommodate debit or credit cards. And a final thing about money, remember Japan has a no tipping culture. So you are welcome to tip your personal guide, private driver, but it's not expected. And if you do leave a tip at your hotel or restaurant, I've heard many stories where people have been chased down by staff with their forgotten change. So if you want that experience, feel free to leave a tip, but it's in no ways normal. Next slide. And speaking of money, of course, shopping is a great bit of fun while traveling. I personally love overbuying souvenirs, and a great place to buy souvenirs for your bulk of your friends is the 100 yen shops. Now, this is similar to the US dollar store, but the quality is much higher. So it is actually quite good quality souvenirs that many people will be happy to receive. You could always go to a temple flea market or a handmade craft good shop for those unique gifts, maybe for yourself, or you could visit a department store for some of those high-end fashion items. And if you see that Japan tax-free shop sticker on a store, that means they're a participant. And as long as you make a $50 or more purchase, have your passport handy, have the receipt, find a clerk, and they should be able to fill out a customs form, making your item tax-free as long as conditions are all followed. Next slide. And of course, food. Personally, my favorite thing about traveling is eating local cuisine. Japanese cuisine has been registered as a UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage, so it's definitely worth trying. There's so many different things to try, of course, including the well-known sushi, ramen, but there's so many other things, including street foods such as kushikatsu, which is the deep fried skewered vegetables and meats. You have so many things. I can't even start to list them all. But you could always eat in style and luxury in Tokyo, especially, as Tokyo does have the most number of Michelin star restaurants in the world. And this beats out even Paris, which may come to a surprise to some of you. But there are so many high-end, delicious restaurants in Tokyo. But doesn't mean you have to go to one for good food. Some of the best meals I've had have been street stall foods, mom and pop shops, hidden nooks that you would have never walked into, but you just happened to walk by when you were hungry. So definitely try eating anything and everything while in Japan. Next slide. And I think that's it. So thank you so much. And now I'm very excited to hear Jacob's presentation.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Simone, for covering that. Jacob, as I already given the introduction to Jacob Shachon, just a great friend, historian, and a scholar that you'll enjoy. Just a minute before he starts, we have a quick video, and then Jacob, as soon as it's completed, the show's on you.
Always go further, seeking the truth, the secret in its depth, as if what we thought we knew was what we knew least. A waterfall, a mountain, an infinite sequence, the universe here and not there, like an eternity. Water, mountains, forest, and the gods of the forest. To go elsewhere is to go beyond the very idea we have of the idea. See otherwise, live differently, and discover. That's how we find out who we really are. The real begins at the heart of things. Gifu.
Jacob, welcome. Is your mute off? Jacob, are you there? Are you having technical difficulties right now?
I I think you can hear me by now, right?
Oh, yes, sir. We can hear you right
okay.
now. Welcome, my
Okay.
friend. Welcome. Okay.
Hi. Nice to have all of you here with us. I'm talking to you now from Israel. And Japan happens to have a very special place in my heart. I like to travel all over the world. Japan is probably one of the most different places one can travel to. And we have a special connection because of some of the stories we'll hear, but also because of some amazing similarities, or I don't know if similarities is the right word, but things that we have in common as Israelis, as Jews, I should say, Jews worldwide, with Japanese tradition, and we'll talk about some of them as we go. So of course, we know where we are going to. Next slide, please. In addition to the wonderful itineraries one can cover only in this island without going to thousands of miles away to the remote and most interesting and fascinating places north and south. But if we stay on the island, I took a route which connects us from Tokyo to Kyoto, and on the way we'll stop at a couple places, some of them because I think are fascinating, and some of them have to do with the story I'd like to tell you today about why personally, in addition to going on a tour, on a trip, I kind of go on a pilgrimage. I go to pay respect at some very special places to very special people. Next, please. First, when to travel. This is what Tokyo would look like now at this time of the year. Fall foliage is unbelievable, not only Tokyo, all over the country. The colors are mind-boggling. It will remind you of many states in your wonderful country, from New England to the Midwest to other locations where you have fall foliage. But next slide, please. You will see in small areas an incredible variety of colors and shades and hues of this fall foliage. Next, please. Everything comes together in such a special way, especially when you go to the temples. And that's when you find out that unlike many parts of the world where you go and you see nature at its beauty, the Japanese, I shouldn't say harnessed nature like they do with the plants, like they do with the shrub and the bush, but planting the trees in such a way that when they'll either bloom or will be in foliage, it will interact and create such a beautiful backdrop, such a wonderful background to whatever features they want to do, be it the amazing stone lamps, a standing feature in traditional Japanese temple construction, architecture, and the culture of gardens to begin with, which is far more than a garden. And of course, the torii, those special gates that separate the daily, the mundane, from the sacred and hallowed. The other time of the year to travel, of course, will be the cherry blossom period, sometimes in the middle of March through the first couple weeks of April, depending on the location. Actually, today you can monitor, comes in a couple months' time, they're gonna start running probable calendars telling us where will this cherry blossom, the sakura, where it will reach its peak. And that's how many people plan their trips. A few months in advance, you can know, or at least get an idea of roughly when it will take place, and then you can plan your trip. 64 kinds of cherries. Next slide, please. Most of them you don't grow for their fruits. They're not all edible, and the ones that are might not remind you of the big, luscious cherries you have in other countries. Of course, they have those too. But mostly these cherries are used for this 1 week. They bloom, a week to 10 days. But the impact they leave, of course, it's wonderful to have green trees around you all year round, but to come and visit during that peak of the cherry blossom is amazing. Next, please. In addition to the beauty of the flowers, it evokes many thoughts. It's like, I shouldn't say three-penny philosophy, but in a way it is. Because it's so fragile and it's so temporary. It comes, it blooms, and it disappears. It teaches us about the passing of time. It teaches us about the different notions of just current experience and current existence. So they carried it in beautiful poems and novels and plays that were written to such incredible heights. Next slide, please. So you can just imagine what a wonderful feeling it is to be able to walk and see these blossom. Again, different colors, because right after the cherries, you have the plums and you have the other fruits. Sometimes they come together, and that's very special. Now we see a very, very typical festivity. Sakura is the cherry blossom, but now we have this kind of celebration where people leave the office and they provide for them in the public parks, they provide for them these big sheets. And the people from the office will come after work to celebrate. They'll bring some takeaway food, they'll bring some drinks, and they'll sit and talk and have a wonderful time. They pass under the cherry blossom. A special holiday, it's a special activity which is practiced in many of the public parks, and eventually as you wander through Tokyo, I'm sure that in one of the afternoons you will come to one of these parks and see the people lounging and having a great time, and you will be surprised how many of them will invite you to join them and share with them a bite of their wonderful delicacies they're enjoying and raise a toast. Next, please. So you have seen, of course, the movies. Many of you might have been there, so you know the amazing combination Japan has to offer between the traditional architecture, between the beauty of these architectonic elements and the special features. And every item has a certain meaning. Every component has a certain message. Yes, please. So we'll go definitely to visit some of the big temples. They're right in downtown, and they're quite impressive. When I talk about temples and when I talk about religion, I might make a slight distinction that to say that in the Orient, as many of you may know, we're not talking religions in a sense of like the monotheistic religions that are very structured and very confined and very to themselves. In the Orient, I would maybe use the word philosophies. They are accommodating, they are open, and you will often find a Buddhist temple next to a Shinto one, and it's quite common for somebody to go into both temples, light a candle, say a prayer, turn a prayer wheel, or do some of the other rituals one does when you go to the temple. Next, please. And as you have seen in many of the pictures and the movies, on a clear day, you can definitely see this amazing mountain, Mount Fuji, from many various locations. And the combination of these amazing high-rise buildings and this modern architecture that harbors within the narrow streets, sometimes these traditional temples and old architecture, along with this beautiful nature that is the backdrop for everything. Next, please. So the city itself didn't have so many high-rise buildings until just a few decades ago. You must have heard that Japan lies, of course, on a very active tectonic area, but in the last few decades, they have developed more and more systems and methods to construct buildings that will withstand the occasional movement of the tectonic plates, and planet Earth is demonstrating some incredible victory of the human mind and spirit over some of the challenges that nature would offer. Next, please. I think many of you would be familiar with these scenes, talking about illumination, talking about a beautiful game of the lights, and sometimes you are not really sure whether it's day or night because it is done in such a beautiful way in many great parts of the city, especially, of course, in the Ginza and some other parts of the city, some other neighborhoods and quarters. Next, please. This is one of the most famous, if not the most famous, cross point where you cross the street. So you wait for a minute or so, and then the lights change and everybody crosses in each and every direction. And sometimes you have literally hundreds and thousands of people who cross simultaneously. So that will be definitely a must on one's itinerary, either to, of course, cross it yourself and be part of the crowds that move in each and every conceivable direction, or go like the picture does here. You can go to one of the upper floors. You don't have to go that high, third or fourth floor in one of the buildings, which all offer this kind of windows to see these phenomena. Yes, please. Next. We heard about the Shinkansen, we heard about the rapid train, and it is an experience by itself. Next, please. They have these, we talked about illumination and we talk about lights, and they really brought it to such unbelievable levels in so many places on such a grand scale that you can try not to be impressed. It's not going to help you. You're going to be very impressed and very moved by their special festivities that have to do with the lights and colors and motions between water and bringing nature into the urban landscape. Next, please. Again, I am personally fascinated with everything they do in the sense of architecture, almost like defying nature and creating these very complex and stable structures. Next, please. As we can see from various directions. Next, please. I don't think I would ever talk about such items which are very personal and very private and not necessarily a topic, but one thing one can say, you have been to probably some of the nicest and cleanest places in the world, but something to definitely rave about is when one has to go and relieve themselves in some public facilities which are going to find clean beyond imagination. One of the latest additions to the scene are these public facilities which have these transparent, translucent walls, and people are hesitant. What do you mean I have to step inside? Of course, the moment you close the door from the inside, the glass becomes opaque and one can enjoy their privacy. But definitely an item, definitely a conversation piece. Another place one definitely goes to is the fish market. The traditional fish market that many of you have seen pictures of and have seen has shut down just a few months ago, and it was moved from the center city to a new, big, fascinating, modern, incredible location. But around the old market, next slide, please. One can still see some shops and some stalls still selling some food items. Especially people will come for breakfast. Even though you might have had your breakfast at the hotel, you'll still be amazed at how much appetite you're going to discover within yourself as you walk these narrow lanes right outside the fish market. Next, please. Next slide, please. So you must have heard about the amazing prices. I mean, who's ever heard of paying this kind of money for a fish? They come to the auctions early morning and they have kind of a hook and they pinch a piece of the flesh of the fish. They'll taste it and that will determine how much money they'll offer. The guy might not make a lot of money on this fish, but you can imagine that he has some claim to fame, if nothing else. And such events take place quite often. Next slide, please. This is the new fish market. You have to travel a little out of town, but it is done in a wonderful way, which now can also accommodate tourists, whether they come on tour buses or they take the train, which brings you right there, or they come by cars, by sedans, by limos. And the important stuff, next slide, please, is the fact that you have been there before. or after you have been to the shrines, to the sanctuaries, and everything creates such an amazing mixture. In the same day, you're going to be able to do such different activities. Next, please. There is a section of the city, Omotesando, where you walk and it's like somebody handpicked the best architects and most interesting and intriguing architects in the world who have put some unbelievable building. Of course, I could spend hours now, literally hours, going over dozens and dozens of unique buildings featuring amazing architecture. Next, please. But the experience of going to this place combined with the shopping experience, because that's where you have some of the finest shops featuring designer items and unique boutiques, one-of-a-kind local designers, as well as global trends. The combination of the architecture, the display, the layout, the design, the interiors and the exteriors of the building really creates a unique experience. Next slide, please. I mean, can you imagine? This is like a Starbucks place. Isn't that nice to be able to step out with your coffee and sit and look at this beautiful garden with the wonderful architecture surrounding you? Next, please. Not far from Omotesando, we have this quarter, which is geared, originally, I think they really wanted only the youngest people, but it's so fascinating. And we go to look not only at what the young people look like, but what they buy. And eventually we are gonna be able to find lots of stuff for ourselves. This is like on the more casual, very, very crowded street where you're gonna have some unbelievable places to visit in addition to the stores and shop on the street. Next, please. Going back to what we said before about the fish market, I'm afraid I might have mislocated the slides and the order has changed a little. This is a renewed chance to see the auction. For many years, we used to go there like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and then it was not comfortable for them and they didn't let us in. Now they've created a special visitor gallery so we can see all these merchants, the restaurant owners, the fish shop owners and vendors who come for the auction. All of these would relate to the big tuna, amazing tuna fish. Next, please. So talking about those special coffee shops, of course, I have to apologize for the order in which the pictures appear. I want to go back to Harajuku, to Omotesando, to this part of the city, and look at the kind of hostesses you might find in the coffee shop you walked in. Next, please. Then you can come to some coffee shops where you're going to enjoy your coffee or tea or whatever beverage with some very interesting animals. When was the last time you had a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, fondling and handling all kinds of interesting rodents and porcupines? Next, please. How about cats? How about coffee shops filled with cats that will come and let you caress them and let you fondle them? And they will be all over the place and you will be part of the scene. Next, please. How about going to have a coffee with the owls, with the special coffee shops where the owls are there for you to interact with, to touch, to caress? Next, please. And for the daring ones, why not sit around with a few snakes around you and on your laps and in your hand and around your neck? How about that for a nice afternoon for coffee or tea? Next, please. Now, some people might not have live animals and they have pet toys. How about a coffee shop where you bring your pet toy to interact with the other pet toys? So the owners and the toys are having a great time in this coffee shop. Next, please. Now that's something very, very special, very unique. They have this festival where the mothers bring their young babies to a special place where sumo warriors, next please, and they put the babies into the hands of the sumo warriors. The first baby that starts crying gets the first prize. Next, please. Now, if you think that you are very serious and your life is just too perfect and you find a way to get out of it for a while, you can join a therapy class, which is crying therapy. You come there and the guy will tell you very sad stories and will move you into tears. Next, please. What an incredible way to relieve one's pressure and stress. Next, please. And some of them really make a whole career out of it, where they go to this special place where it's only the most handsome and most beautiful actors, actresses, narrators of the various sessions. Next, please. Of course, you can go to different locations to rent dresses, not just for weddings, but for various occasions. For any occasion, anybody can come and they'll fit you with the typical kimono or other parts of their wardrobe that will be the ones that you will enjoy. Next, please. Something quite interesting, when you travel around the streets in Japan, you will see on some windows this red triangle. This red triangle, next please, indicates to the people inside and outside where the emergency exit is. So God forbid something happens, whether it's fire or whatever, the rescue and fire brigades will know to which window they come, and the people on that floor will know where to rush to for help and rescue. Next, please. Of course, the train, and the reason I talked about the rescue and fire is because the kind of attention the Japanese pay to details, like they want to leave nothing for, for just an incident. They'd like to think and plan ahead of everything. Next, please. We saw a picture, we already heard about these amazing trains. What I'm fascinated with the trains, look at this one. The attendant, the one who checks your tickets or the one who serves beverages or whatever, and just walks through and makes sure everything is okay. Each time they walk into the cabin, they'll bow. Leaving the cabin, they'll bow again. And they have what they call the 7 minutes miracle. The train stops. They have carried it and perfected it to such an art form that within 7 minutes, an army of attendants will raid the train, will clean, disinfect, bring it back to like immaculate, spotless condition. Everything is done within 7 minutes. That's what they call the 7 minutes miracle. Next, please. We took the train from Tokyo and we arrived at Kyoto. This is one of my favorite train stations in the world. It features such unbelievable structure. And at night, they have this amazing game with the lights and the sounds, and the stairs are illuminated, and they have outdoor performances and gazillion eateries and shops. I mean, it's like a whole entertainment center by itself, this unbelievable Kyoto station, modern beyond imagination, and quite high. You take quite a few of these escalators all the way up to the roof where another scene is waiting for you. Next slide, please. So, as the case was in Tokyo, as the case is all over Japan, you have the modern and the very traditional, the older section. This is the quarter where lots of the tourists will come looking for the geisha or the maikos, the different stages in the training of these fine ladies. Next, please. This lady is not a geisha. She's probably a Chinese tourist. The Chinese tourists, like the Americans, like the Europeans, love very much to rent these kimonos and dress up and walk for a day in these traditional neighborhoods dressed in the traditional kimono dresses. Chances are most of the people you'll see in that outfit might not be Japanese in those quarters, in those neighborhoods. So we know, of course, of the Golden Temple, which is really special, set up against the hillside over the water, the reflection and the vegetation and the way they have trimmed and cut and shaped the trees to accompany it in the most splendid way. Next slide, please. I personally recommend something not too many people do, a short trip right on the outskirts of town into an amazing bamboo forest where you can take a nice hike or enjoy a rickshaw ride in the bamboo forest. Next, please. And of course, admire the bridges. Bridges are not just a way to cross from one side to the other, but something that harbors almost a philosophical concept. By crossing the bridge to go to the other side, you make a decision, you come to a conclusion, you take a step to a new area, to a different area. And it's so interesting that they actually feel that way. You talk to them, they will not make a big thing out of it. But in their gardens, if they have a traditional tea garden, inevitably, definitely they'll have a bridge and lots of other features that I cannot have, of course, the time now to go into it because it does take some time and it's absolutely fascinating. Next, please. Of course, visiting the temple, also a little out of town, just to walk through these incredible walkway with these arches, with these gates. Remember, the gate moves you from one realm to the other. And another fascinating feature is the Zen Garden. Zen, as you know, is a special philosophical part of the greater world of Buddhism. I like this garden in particular very, very much. You walk in and you count 1, 2, 3, 4, so many stones. You move to the other side, you see the same number of stones, but they're not the same stones. Some stones you saw before, you cannot see now. And that again evokes a little of a philosophical thought. Sometimes we look at something and we think we see the whole picture. Hey, guess what? Surprise, there are some things that are hidden from the eye. You have to do a little effort, change your point of view to discover new things, or some things you thought you had all of a sudden disappear. So it's a reminder to many different, again, I'm drifting maybe a little too much into this philosophy, but I find it personally absolutely fascinating. Next, please. We go, of course, we saw in the movie, we heard about the Nijo Castle, a beautiful royal castle, which used to be home to the rulers. Kyoto was the capital of Japan for many years until the middle of the 19th century when the capital was moved to Tokyo. Yes, please. Next, please. Also here, we like to go to the market, not the fish market like we have done in Tokyo, but the Nishiki market, which offers, again, from fruits and vegetables to all kinds of processed meat and fish and all kinds of interesting street food. Next, please. And we leave Kyoto and we drive out into the countryside. And this happens to be one of my favorite stops in the country. It is the house which was designed and built by Kubota. He was a kimono artist. Next, please. This is where I connect very much to the Japanese people with the way they look at ancient tradition as almost sacred and hollow. He dedicated his life to restore an art form which is almost all but gone, and revive it using a very intricate, detailed work of tie, notes, deep, color, all kinds of different techniques. And the pictures do not do justice when you really have to look at the details. Next, please. So you can see these kimonos were not meant to be worn. They are an artwork by themselves, each and every one of them, but he picked up the theme of the kimono to connect to this major feature in Japanese tradition. Next, please. So I guess you got the idea. The building itself is unbelievable. It's designed and made out of wood with this big empty space going up into like a very high ceiling. And it's not a dome. The whole building has some very unique characteristics, and it's built out of this huge wooden beam. So it's an experience by itself to visit the museum. Next, please. All right. I might have had one or two too many because I really like it. Next, please. And that brings us to the real story of our visit today, because I'm trying to touch and connect between the Jewish story and the Japanese story. To do that, we might have to go way back with many people along the years who believed that some similarities, I have difficulties relating to it, but of course I read about it and I tell about it, between some rites and rituals practiced by the Japanese that might remind some of the Jews, that has led to the conclusion that maybe the Japanese are the descendants of the lost tribes. As some of you would know, the Assyrians have invaded our country, the land of Israel, in the year 721 BCE. And that's when they have taken the northern tribes, the 10 northern tribes, on exile, and basically we've never heard about them again. Every now and then we discover different groups around the world which claim or would suggest that they might be the descendants. Between the way the Japanese wash and maintain cleanliness, the way Jews are so careful, between the devotion and respect to the elders, to the tradition and what have you. So here comes a very special story. This gentleman on the left, Father Otsuka, unfortunately is no longer with us, was a chaplain in the Japanese army during the years when Japan has occupied Manchuria in China. And he was stuck in a very remote region. And that's when in the late 30s, years before the World War II, before the Holocaust, before the foundation of the State of Israel, he came up with the idea that a homeland should be built for the Jews in the traditional homeland and a state should be established there. So here is somebody who envisioned the foundation of the State of Israel even before we could think about it in that way. He's never seen a Jew in his life, never been to Israel, didn't know much about the country, but he was a Bible scholar and fascinated with the biblical stories, and he had these revelations, and that has led him to create a fascinating church. Next, please. And this is the choir which sings in that church. They sing in Hebrew. The song you heard when you were waiting for this presentation to begin at the beginning of our meeting was recorded, especially now because of the COVID-19. It was recorded in their individual locations. But these people travel, some of them travel for an hour or two to come to the special meetings they have in this church. And a few times a week, they welcome Jewish visitors, Israelis and Jews from all over the world. Some of them have studied in Israel. They speak Hebrew fluently, and of course, they speak English. And they welcome us, and they share with us the amazing love story they have to the Jewish people and to the land of Israel. You can just imagine how emotional it gets. There is never a single dry eye in the house. And when they start singing, like you've heard them singing at the entrance, and you'll be able, of course, to get a recording of this presentation, let me tell you, it's one of the most moving experiences. Next, please. This choir, by the way, travels throughout many different places all over Japan and the world, and they come every few years and they perform in Israel. Japanese and Jews, I mentioned they might be some kind of similarities in ancient times, but that didn't mean that they knew much about Judaism. Actually, for the longest time, there were no Jews in Japan, unlike countries in Europe or in the United States, North America, or they got to Australia and other locations. But there were very few in Japan, which was close to foreigners to begin with for the longest time. And then what would they do there if there are very few and they cannot practice their religion and their ritual slaughtering and whatever? There were none. But now come the 1930s. I shouldn't say none. There were a few hundred people, but there was not a Jewish entity as such. Now comes the 1930s. Japan was a struggling economy, a mighty military superpower, but they didn't have the industry, the sophisticated products they were producing into the 50s, 60s, 70s, let alone what they do now. They were trying to increase and improve their economy. They looked around the world to see what can they do to interact and increase their export and what have you. And they were getting the media from Germany, where the Nazis were describing the Jews as subhumans, as vermins, as people who plot to take over the world economy, but somehow they figured that the Jews are genetically gifted to make money. And here comes this amazing idea. The Japanese decided to import, quote unquote, import a few tens of thousands of Jews that will help them build the Japanese economy. But unlike the Germans, they will not let the Jews take over the Japanese economy. They will treat it like the fugu, hence the name of the book, which I highly recommend if you can get it. I think it will be an amazing thing for you to discover. Fugu is the Japanese name for the blowfish. You know, it's a delicacy for them, but it can be very poisonous. It has a gland with some kind of poison that if it spreads in the piece, yes, Marvin Tukeya, right, Marian. Marvin Tukeya was the chaplain. He was a rabbi with the American army in Japan after the war, and that's where he has discovered lots of these stories. So the Japanese like the fugu, but there are only few chefs around the world who are licensed and insured to serve it, because if somebody takes a bite which has some of the poison, forget it. No antidote, nothing to do about it. So they said, we'll treat them like we treat the fugu fish, to benefit and enjoy, but be very careful. Hence comes this story, which of course never was fulfilled, but it did reverberate and made echoes, and that's when we leave now and go to Europe. Next, please. We go to the tiny little country of Lithuania, which is stuck between Poland, Belarus, Latvia, and parts of Russia. And this is, on the left is what this country, tiny little country, looks now with just under 4 million inhabitants. Today, Vilnius is the capital of the country. But look at the map to the right. During the interwar years, Lithuania did not exist really as such an entity before the end of World War II. It was part of the Tsar, the Russian Empire. And when it became independent, Vilnius was not the capital. The capital was Kaunas. The war breaks, the Germans invade Poland, and lots of Jews flee Poland, and they come, many thousands of them, to Lithuania. Next slide, please. And that's where a very fine gentleman sees them, and he comes up with an amazing idea. He sees refugees who'd like to get away from it all, but nobody will let them through because they cannot obtain visas to go anywhere. He's a Dutch gentleman. His name is Jan Zwartendijk. He runs the Philips factory in Kaunas, in Lithuania. There is no embassy or consulate of Holland in Lithuania. The nearby embassy is in the neighboring country of Latvia. He comes up with an incredible idea saying, let these people declare that they're going to travel to the Dutch colonies of Curacao and Aruba. You can just imagine on the other side of the globe with no real decent access to it, especially now that the war has started. But he says, I will authorize and say that if you travel to Curacao, you don't need a visa. He went to the ambassador liked the idea, authorized him, and he started issuing thousands and thousands of such documents. Next slide, please. He was recognized just recently by the a Dutch king, and the lady is the president of Lithuania, for this amazing idea which has led to the rescue of thousands of Jews. But that would not have been possible without our Japanese hero. Next slide, please. That's the monument that I was talking about. Next, please. So now look at what he's supposed to do. People are going to leave Kaunas with these transit visas. They'll be able to go to Moscow. In Moscow, they will board the Trans-Siberian train that takes, depending on what exact route it does, but it takes 7 to 10 days to get to the Pacific Ocean, all across Russia, through parts, some of it goes through Mongolia today, different parts of China, and then they will set sail from Vladivostok, and their port of entry will be Suruga. Some of them went to Kobe, Yokohama, but the main port of entry for many of them was Suruga. How was that made possible? Next slide, please. This is our hero, Chiyune Sugihara, or as his friends and family called him, Sempo. Born, very easy date to remember, January 1st, 1900. His father wanted him to be a doctor. He didn't want to. So he failed himself by writing only his first name on the exam sheet. And he wanted to study languages, which he did, and he joined the foreign service, and he became a diplomat representing Japan in many locations throughout Europe. He was fluent, in addition to Japanese, English, German, Russian, some Chinese, and as such, he was able to serve beautifully in these foreign countries. Next slide, please. The war breaks, and he is now sent to Kaunas, the capital of yet an independent country, to be a consul for Japan. Now, let's face it, there was very little business, if any, or anything to do with Japan in this dormant, tiny little country without any significant industry or any significant economy of sorts. What he was there for was to kind of spy, report about the moves and advance of the both Germans from one side and the Russians. This is before Operation Barbarossa. That's before the Germans have decided to invade into Russia. So he's stationed here, doing very little business. Next slide, please. He came here with his wife, Yokiko. She's the lady in the center, and her sister, who came to help her taking care of these 3 young children. Next, please. And this was his office, which now serves as a museum. Next, please. One day, Mrs. Sugihara, Yokiko, sees through the window of the house where they live, she sees that outside of this gate, there are people crowded. Remember this picture because it's going to be something we'll relate to later on. Next, please. So the building of the consulate and the signs marking it, beginning in Lithuania and literally subsequently all over the world. Next, please. This is what she saw. She saw outside of this house, she saw all these people waiting. They would like to talk to Mr. Sugihara, the consul. By now, they were given the transit visa from the Dutch consul that says they can travel to Curacao, but they still have to go through Japan. So they need a transit visa through Japan. Sugihara, an obedient and very professional and very meticulous diplomat, writes to the Foreign Office in Japan, and the answer is no. But he looks at these people and he hears their story, and they are refugees and they are suffering, and what will happen to them? By now, news come about what happens in Europe to the Jews, in occupied Europe. He writes again, no, third time, no. Next slide, please. This is the time when he begins to do his own thinking. He says to himself, if I obey my government, I will sin to my God. And I must make a decision, and I must make it now. And it was between him and the discussions he had with Yokiko, with his wife, that led him to the conclusion, I shouldn't use the word the heck with it, but that's kind of what he said in spite of the clear instructions. Next slide, please. He started issuing this kind of visas. So these were transit visas that let the people go through Japan, supposedly on their way to Curacao. The gentleman in this picture, one of the people he helped, over the years survived, made it to Israel, and became the Minister of Religious Affairs in Israel. Next slide, please. This is the gentleman, and that's when he met Sugihara when he came for a visit to Jerusalem. So can you imagine this amazing emotional reunion of the Savior and the person who he has saved, who is then at the time was the, as I said, Minister of Religious Affairs. Next, please. Many more people were given this, as you see, transit visa. And you see the person was seen for the journey through to go to Curacao. By now, of course, Holland is going to be invaded by the Germans, but they didn't make it to, the Germans didn't make it to Curacao, so supposedly the Jews can travel there. And guess what happens next? 6,000 of such documents he issues. He was sharing his thoughts and his feelings and emotions. The government didn't like what he did. He was given instructions because the Germans were advancing. He was giving instructions to leave the consulate. He moved into a hotel and he continued issuing the visas day and night, day and night. At one point, he didn't go through all the details. He just stamped and quickly, next, what's your name? Mr. Goldstein, Mr. Goldberg, what's your name? What's your name? 6,000 people were able to ride the train and make it to Japan. When he came back to Japan, he was revoked of all of his titles. They revoked his pension because he disobeyed clear instructions from the government. And for the next 15 years, he travels through rural Soviet Union as a salesperson for some Japanese products. Japan, as I said, was building itself up into the 50s. And for 15 years, because he spoke the language, he was kind of on an exile until he came back for a home visit. And that's when one of the survivors made a point of it to look for him. He never found him. He made himself join the diplomatic corps of Israel in Japan, and then hectic search, and then he finds and he says, Mr. Sugihara, you have saved my life. And that's when his story was revealed. Next, please. All of a sudden, he became a hero. They were singing his praises. They were honoring him. He was traveling all over the world. He was invited into Israel. He was recognized as what we call a righteous among the nations. Next, please. He has planted a tree in the garden. Monuments were were built in his honor. And here we have the previous emperor and empress of Japan visiting his monument and paying respect. Can you imagine? Just a few years earlier, he was like persona non grata to a certain extent, and now he became a national, or rather international hero. Next, please. This is the region of Gifu. We have seen the short movie promoting this magnificent place, which has very, very interesting sites and a way to look into like unchanged lifestyles, things that are very difficult to see in many other parts of Japan. Here you can really look into the past. And the jewel in the crown, next please. For me, of course, is the Sugihara Museum. In the hometown, that's where he was born. They built this fascinating museum. We see the bust, we see his portrait. Next, please. You walk inside and the place is absolutely gorgeous, combining traditional Japanese architecture and building material with very modern structures. And the story is being told in a few languages. All of these unfolding of the events, and especially the fate of these people whom he has helped to save. Next, please. They have published these booklets, which you can pick up in many different languages, and you look at the title, A Decision of Love, and I cannot think of a more proper description of this decision. Next, please. So visiting the museum is not only for us, it is really mostly geared at the Japanese people. They bring school kids, they bring teachers, they bring police officers, military people, government officials. Next, please. Outside are beautiful gardens, and these are the bells that chime the message of love. Next, please. And in front of the building, they have what they call the Hill of Sounds. When the wind blows through these pipes, it makes such incredible tunes. It's a sheer pleasure just sitting there waiting for the wind to come, and you really get carried away in a very, very unique way. Leave it to the Japanese, right? To make it so special. Next, please. As I mentioned, he was honored. They were issuing stamps with his character. You know, in Judaism, we don't have saints, but these people who rescued, who risked their lives even to help them. You know, when he was boarding the train, the Jews were chasing the train, and he said to the operator, please, please slow down. And he was stamping, what's your name, Moses? What's your name? And then he threw at them a pile of the papers and the stamp. Hopefully they might be able to use it even when he was gone away. Next, please. Can you imagine? He was kind of beatified by the Russian Orthodox Church to become like a saint. Can you imagine? This is the second half of the 20th century. We are talking about in the last 30 years. Next, please. His character, those of you who come from the Los Angeles area might see his statue. It is located in Los Angeles. He's really all over the place. Next, please. That's when he met with the Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Shamir, on one of his visits. He has visited Israel a number of times. His son was given a scholarship to study in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Speaks, still, thank God, still around in his 80s and visits Israel quite often. Next, please. This is the tree that he planted in the Garden of the Righteous Among the Nations in Yad Vashem, which is Israel memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. Next, please. And that is his son now leaning against the tree, which grew up to be this beautiful big carob tree. Next, please. We name after him some parks. This is a street in the town of Netanya. Miriam, the mayor of Netanya, is the lady on the right, along with the members of the family and the Japanese embassy. Next, please. And one book, another book I should recommend, maybe even more than anything else, is this book, which was written just a few years ago by his wife. Unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago. Visas for Life. And the picture, as you see on the cover of the book, is the picture of these people waiting outside the gate. And the gate carried today an inscription, Gates of Hope, Visas for Life. A fascinating book telling the story from her perspective. Next, please. There was another Japanese diplomat that is still an unsung hero, which for me is very important to mention. And he served as the consul in the port in Russia. So they got to the port, they have the visas, but still, who are you? Where are you going to? So he has helped and facilitated the movement and the ability of these people to board some ship. For some of the passengers who ran by now out of money, he arranged the trip free of charge to go into the Japanese islands from mainland Asia, from Russia. Next, please. And that's the route that they took. As I mentioned, he was in Vladivostok. And as we mentioned, they went into various harbors. But most importantly was Tsuruga. You see where Tsuruga is. It's like your port of entry into Japan. Yeah, right here. Thank you. Next slide, please. These are the people disembarking in Tsuruga, wondering, okay, where do we go next? Next, please. And this is what one of you has mentioned, right? There is a beautiful museum in this town, which was opened just a few years ago. Then it closed down because of the COVID, and I hope that soon we'll be able to visit it again. For me, it's like, again, like a pilgrimage. You see Sugihara's image on the front of the building, and inside is another beautiful museum. And as you wrote it, the name of the museum is the Port of Humanity. The whole idea of calling the Port of Tsuruga the Port of Humanity. Next, please. Again, inside the magnificent museum, again geared mostly at the Japanese people, but also for the international visitors. I must mention here that this was another port of entry for a very big and very special story, which is a separate story by itself, of Polish children, non-Jewish children, orphans and victims uprooted. Very interesting story. And that's where they were able to find welcoming hands when they finally arrived. Thank you, Akinori. Thank you so much. Yes, please. I will not talk much today. There is a small Jewish community. This is the Jewish Community Center in Tokyo, but that is not the purpose of our visit. My main pilgrimage is to honor the culture and those heroes, Sugihara, his families, and some other people about whom we might never know, who helped take these people in and shelter them throughout these tough times until the war was over. Thanks. Next. Thank you so much.
Wow. Jacob, that was fantastic and emotional at the same time. I found it to be an incredible story. What a brave soul, huh? To have done so much for so many. And certainly the region represents his efforts greatly, and you certainly shared the story in a very well spent way. So I appreciate all that information and sharing. I'm going to be bringing on now Alita and Zahava. If you want to unmute yourselves. And Alita, I don't know if we've had questions that have been coming about.
Yes.
And I know there's a lot of chats. I see there's 35 comments in the chat and some Q&A. So if you could take the lead.
Yes, sure.
And all of us can, you can decide who you want to send the question to, who it might be appropriate for. Again, first of all, Jacob, thank you. I mean, really, thank you. That was just beautiful, what you shared with us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jacob. Thank you, everyone. It's been very active. I've been in the chats and in the Q&A. So first of all, thank you all for the all wonderful comments. There has been quite a few. Learned a lot. Thank you. Thank you. That was so informative. What an amazing presentation. Thank you. This is amazing history. Thank you, Jacob. Wow, hero. Wow, I love this history. So you have been really engaged, and it looks like it was very interesting for all of you. So from here, I think that we can find out a bit more of information. I invite you all, if you have any more questions, to drop them in the Q&A, and we will start. Unless, Zehava, you wanted to say something before we jump into the questions?
No, I think that we should start with the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so what is the name of that busy crossing? The one that was, I believe, in Tokyo. Jacob, would you take that one?
What is the question? Sorry.
The name of the very busy crossing.
Oh, Shibuya, Shibuya. That's called Shibuya crossing.
Thank you. Next question is how the passengers in ship can disembark on a port. This was a question that was posted in the beginning, so maybe Siobhan.
It would be with, I'm assuming, with the cruise. So the cruise line, whatever company you decide to ride on, will be able to help with any of the planned on-land trips.
Thank
Well, actually,
you.
let me jump in for a minute here. So that's actually what a service that we provide. So that's a great question.
Okay.
And you're right. So really we cover everything from, everything on the land, wheels down, wheels up, port in, port out. So anybody, and we do quite a few of the shoreline excursions. So anybody that is on a cruise that's going to stop in any port in the world, not just in Japan, but anywhere in the world, we have all our partners that can handle the private service to pick them up. They can avoid all the the issues with getting on large buses with a number of people. We can do a private setting, a controlled setting, be ready to pick them up. They can get in, get out, and be able to have a lot more flexibility. So it really behooves you on behalf of your clients, if they're taking a cruiser, to have all this done ahead of time so that they can have ease and not have to worry about it. And again, obviously it's commissionable too if you do it ahead of time versus having it done on the cruise.
Thank you, Michael. So the next one, I think this was posted before this museum was featured on the presentation, but we will still answer it. Where is the Kubota Museum? Jacob?
Sorry.
Yes,
we can post the location. We can post the link to the location of this museum. Definitely a must.
But this is in which region is that?
I'm looking now. I'll post the
okay.
The link
Saban,
to the
where is
website.
the Kubota Museum? Do you know, Saban?
There's so many museums. I believe that one is in Yamanashi Prefecture, which is neighboring to Tokyo. So you should be able to do an easy day trip there as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, this one is for you, Jacob. What happened when the Jews arrived in Japan? What did they contribute to the war economy?
Oh, very, very complicated story. Many of them were transferred. Remember, the world is at war. And Japan was an ally of the Germans. It was part of the Axis. Remember, there was Japan, Germany, and Italy, and then some other splinter countries like Romania, like Bulgaria, and Slovakia. So guess what happens? Many of these Jews are moved to Shanghai, where a ghetto was set up, along with other Jews who fled Russia after the revolution, and they were all incarcerated. Shanghai was occupied by the Japanese at that time. And they were put into a ghetto. Some of you who might have visited Shanghai could visit it. It's called Hongkou. And for the next couple of years, 22,000 Jews are crowded into this ghetto. Now the Germans hear about it. They send an officer who had some experience, quote unquote, in extermination. He was sent to convince the Japanese to eliminate the Jews, to kill the Jews, exterminate them. The Japanese look at him as, he's like from outer space. He was dined and wined very cordially and mannerly, and then he was led the next morning to the same plane that brought him and sent back to Iran. They never harmed the Jews. The whole world was at war. Nobody had plenty, but the Jews were beautifully treated in the sense that they were safe. Some of them were able to go out and work. Some money that was sent from Jewish communities around the world was able to reach them. There were some very wealthy Jewish people who lived in Japan, in China, in Shanghai, the Kaduri family, the Sassoons. They are the ones who have some of the Peace Hotel and some of the beautiful properties before the revolution. And they helped also the Jews. Entire yeshivot, entire theological seminars were accommodated by them into special properties, and they continued studying, they continued practicing Judaism. And there is an interesting museum in Shanghai that is definitely worthwhile visiting in the Hongkou former Jewish ghetto. So that's where many of them ended up. Some others continued to Australia, to South Africa. Many of them after the war arrived at Israel, and many, many into the United States and Canada. Very few stayed in Japan, just very, very few. Some of them stayed there because they married with locals. But Japan, as you can imagine, after the war was in ruins. It was devastated. Some of the quarters were, pulverized into the Stone Age. And it was not the greatest place, to be at the time. So they continued on. Very few stayed in Japan.
Thank you so much. That's very informative. Another question that just came up was regarding is there kosher food available and can they be in a Jewish service in Japan?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are a few Chabad locations. Chabad Lubavitch is these kind of like emissaries that set shop with an address to anything Jewish all over the world. So in Tokyo alone, there are 2 of them. And there are a few other facilities. If you go to the Japanese Alps in Takayama, and there are definitely Jewish infrastructure in a sense of getting Jewish food and attending services. Absolutely.
Thank you. That's interesting. Michael, this one is for you. Michael, can you consider the follow-up Jewish heritage tour in China?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
And what we did, and if you were with us last week, we did, I think it was last week, everybody's staying home so much these days, I forget what day it is, right? But I think last week we had our Jewish heritage for Prague, Vienna, and Budapest. And if you haven't seen it, if you weren't part of that, you can go to our website, and this is a great resource. We have a YouTube page for iWorld of Travel, and you could also go to iWorldofTravel.com/video, and we have a whole library there for your usage, for referencing for you as well as for your clients. We take out some of the stuff about our company in the beginning and the end, and then just have it available for you to use. So that was and Jacob guided us through that webinar. So yes, of course, we'll continue to look at doing these, and if China is the next requested destination for us to do it, we'll certainly take a look at that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, let's proceed with the question. Where is Sugihara Buris?
Where are Sugihara's what?
Sugihara Buris. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right.
Is it buried? Does it mean where is he buried at?
Buriies. Buriies.
My guess is it was a typo. They're probably asking where was he buried. Is he buried? Where is he? Yeah.
Probably, yes.
Not that I know of. Definitely something to look into.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just Googled it.
Yes, and what did you find?
Yeah, it's in Kanagawa Prefecture, which is right next to Tokyo. So again, another easy way to go. And it's in the city of Kamakura at Kamakura Cemetery. So great
Kamakura is worthwhile a visit because of the big bronze head of Buddha.
Exactly.
Definitely a beautiful place to visit. Thank you so much. I usually celebrate people's life. I'm not very big on burial sites.
Okay, another question here that I already know the answer, but I will let you answer, Michael. Could you please send me the link to the recording of the webinar?
Yeah, so if you're registered, you'll automatically get a link of this live webinar that took place. And then within a week, we will have it edited and up on our website, as well as the YouTube, our YouTube page as well, which it'll be clear. Any mistakes that are done, we'll correct them. Any propaganda at the front with the company, we'll take out again. So you could use it for education as well as for your clients too.
Yes. Okay, so we have a couple of thank you. Thanks, lovely presentation. And here is another question for you, Jacob. Did any of them get to Curacao or Aruba?
None. Curacao. None.
Yeah.
No,
All
nobody
right.
got there. By the way, thank you, Marian, for putting the link to Kubota Museum. If you're in that area, not far from there, I should recommend visiting another small museum, which of course I didn't put, you can do hundreds of places, but if you are there, that is an amazing Japanese artist, and in this tiny little village. I'll definitely put the link now. As soon as I get off, I'll put the link and send it to you. Because he's really very special artist. I'll send it to you right away.
I will also thank Mr. Marian Goldberg. He has been giving a lot of comments and interesting information in the chat and in the beginning in the Q&A. And here it is, one of his comments. Well, you can't jump on any train with your JR pass because you only take Hikari or Kodama Shinkansen on the Tokaido line. So you first have to make sure it's not a Nozomi bullet train. That was one. And the other comment by Marian was also that the futons on the floor are very comfortable. And the futon mattresses is very soft and cozy. It's not like just sleeping on the floor. So with that, we went through the questions. If anyone has anything else to ask, it is your last chance to drop it in the Q&A question section. If not, Michael, I will turn it back to you.
Okay, well, that was just fantastic. I think I've already expressed that. Thank you to everybody who participated. Thank you for the panelists, Jacob, Siobhan, Lita, Zahava, and everybody. Listen, these are trying times. We're trying to make the best of them for everybody by, filling your well with information that could make you feel more fulfilled and more educated as we look for tomorrow for the day after. I know that seems to be getting further and further away, but I will tell you that, as my father says, and I repeat this all the time, we all do see a light at the end of the tunnel, and we don't believe it's a train. So stay strong, keep the faith that we'll come back. 2021 will just inherently be a better year than 2020. And if you have any needs from us, please don't hesitate to reach out to either myself, Zahava, or Lita. It's our first initial last name at iworldoftravel.com. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening, or morning.